Welcome to the East Coast Greenway Alliance's Southeast Greenways and Trails Summit. This is their first ever virtual summit. I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting us for this event. My name is Devin Cowens, and I am the Summit and Event Specialist for the East Coast Greenway. And we have a presentation called Equitable Trail Tourism, Advocating for Affordable and Always Available Accommodations by Saara Snow, who's the Advocacy Manager at the Adventure Cycling Association.
Hi, everyone. So I submitted the proposal for this topic on equity in bike and trail tourism with the idea that it would help me to think about and confront some questions that have been floating around in my head for a while. So it's been a good but hard process to put this presentation together and to try to address some of the very complex issues that this topic brings up. As you'll see, I don't have all of the answers, but I'm hoping that it will be a conversation starters and invite some critical thinking and problem solving around these issues. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Adventure Cycling, we're a national nonprofit with about 45 staff and over 52,000 members. We work to inspire, empower, and connect people to bike travel in the US by creating bike route maps for our 50,000-mile network, advocating for better bike travel conditions, organizing guided tours, and producing a bike travel magazine. So this is the bike route network we've developed over the last 45 years, which follows both roads and trails. When I first started working at Adventure Cycling in late 2013, the concept of bike tourism was really taking off. The phrase bike tourism is booming was being used a lot. There were a lot of studies coming out showing the impressive economic benefits of bike tourism in various states. And we were being invited to speak at conferences about how communities could capitalize on these benefits by building bike tourism. When we talked about bike tourism, we would typically share a couple of main selling points. First, that tourists traveling by bike spend more money than motorized tourists because they travel more slowly and they need more frequent services. And second, demographic data that show that bike tourists tend to have high incomes and be college educated. Emphasizing these demographics was always a little unsettling to me. It felt elitist to say that income and education levels were important for attracting bike tourists. There's of course the idea that people with high incomes spend more money, but there was also the sense that we needed data to combat the underlying stereotype that people only ride bikes because they can't afford to drive. At the time and even now, we felt like we needed to prove to the world that bicyclists are valuable economic contributors. But the question remained for me, does that mean that we don't value everyone else? Does that mean that exclusion of low-income communities was just an unquestioned and accepted part of operating in the tourism industry? So this was when national conversations about equity were starting to take shape, looking at how the bike advocacy world was failing to engage and address the needs of underrepresented communities. And the focus was mainly on bike commuting and mainly in urban areas, which is important. But there was and still has been little or no conversation about how bike and trail tourism can be inclusive of people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm going to pause here and acknowledge that I am not an equity expert. I come from a white middle-class background. And even in the years that my income has fallen below the poverty line, I knew that I had a safety net if I really needed it. So I'm still learning how my layers of privilege intersect and inform my understanding of the world, and where there are still gaps in that understanding, as I'm sure all of you are as well. I grew up spending time and recreating outdoors, learning how to camp, backpack, ride a bike, and I had access to the gear that I needed to do those things. Over the years, I've learned, that this is a barrier in itself for people who come from different socioeconomic, racial, and cultural backgrounds than I did. And I recognize that there are many barriers for especially low-income communities to participate in bike and trail tourism. At minimum, it takes time, money, and knowledge to travel by bike or foot to an overnight destination, not to mention the added stereotypes, biases, and structural challenges that particularly people of color, women, trans femme, and disabled communities face. However, there are many groups working to address these barriers, like Women Trans Femme or WTF Bike Explorers, community bike shops, Outdoor Afro, etc. And there are more and more resources to help bridge those gaps. We, at the Adventure Cycling Office, we often hear stories from people, especially young people, about the creative ways that they have been able to make trips happen on a low budget, and the many ways that they have been introduced to bike travel when they never knew that it was something that people did. But the widespread assumption that tourism is only for people with a higher socioeconomic status has led to the acceptance and practice of exclusivity. Society has decided that by virtue of how much money you make, certain groups of people aren't entitled to travel for pleasure. And the focus on catering to luxury travel and the profit above all else mentality in the tourism industry has left out many groups of would-be travelers. And when it's taken to an extreme, it has led to the degradation of many communities and their local cultures through over-tourism and gentrification. So there's plenty of examples of this in Southeast states and almost everywhere, but particularly along the coast. And we've also created an extremely narrow definition of the target market for outdoor recreation and tourism. These folks are known in the biking community as mammals or middle-aged men in lycra. This kind of exclusivity is what we subscribe to when I mentioned that we were selling the concept of bike tourism based on its ability to attract high-income, college-educated people. But what other paradigms should we expect from tourism, and why should we look beyond the dollar signs? It's clear that economic development does have a lot of great positive impacts. The money that tourism brings to communities, boosts businesses, it employs people, it brings tax income, among other benefits. So why shouldn't your communities and businesses want to try to attract that through trail and bike tourism? For me, the beauty of approaching this through the equity lens is that inviting more people to the table wouldn't threaten or take away from that. It's not about taking the pie away from one group and giving it to the others. It's about recognizing that there's enough pie for everyone to enjoy and thrive, seeing who isn't getting any, and creating space for them to join, and recognizing where distribution of the pie might need to be different to meet different groups' needs. Being open-minded about how measures of success might need to change, and being creative about how to make it happen. So what would bike and trail tourism look like if it were more inclusive of low-income communities? What would it look like if we pivoted toward community hospitality as a guiding principle instead of only looking at how much money we can get people to spend? If our measures of success were based not only on economic development, but also on community development. Existing tourists wouldn't spend any less, so communities would still see economic benefits, but it would open the doors for greater inclusivity of people from different backgrounds to experience our trails and communities. So I'll share some models of how communities can meet the needs of bike and trail tourists in a way that is affordable for guests, but is also financially feasible for the hosts. And because the lack of affordable accommodations is one of the biggest barriers to making bike and trail tourism feasible, I'll be focusing on those examples, particularly for communities and parks. I'll share some case studies from rural communities that approach accommodating bike travelers on adventure cycling routes with a hospitality first philosophy. I'll also share hike and bike camping models for parks, as well as resources to help implement these ideas along the East Coast Greenway. So what are the needs of trail tourists, hikers, and bikers? So human-powered travel is unpredictable, and it requires more creative problem solving when you encounter unexpected challenges. You're more reliant on the services that are available, and especially when those services aren't available, You become reliant on the kindness and hospitality of the community that you're in. So at the end of a long day of biking or hiking, you can't just go 10 miles out of your way to find a place to stay. And especially on longer tours or hikes, making reservations ahead of time becomes impractical. So in the face of this kind of unpredictability, it becomes important for bikers and hikers, and especially those new to overnight travel, to know that there will be accommodations available at the end of the day. And especially for low budget travelers, that also means finding accommodations that are affordable. So Farmington, Missouri is a town of about 20,000 people along Adventure Cycling's Transamerica Bicycle Trail. Community members saw hundreds of cyclists passing through on the route every year. And it was after a local cyclist named Al Ziwa died of cancer, they had the idea to create a bike hostel in his honor called Al's Place. In 2009, the city fixed up a historic building that used to be a city jail. They added bunk beds, a bathroom with a shower, a kitchen, a living room space, with a couch and TV, Wi-Fi, and they also had laundry. They provide shampoo, they have sheets and towels, and they coordinate with parks and recreation staff, as well as local volunteers to keep up with the laundry. So when a cyclist arrives, they can call City Hall or the police station after hours to get the code to the door. And they have a donation box by the door with a suggested donation of $20 per night. And the $4,000 that they raise from that covers the operational expenses to keep the place running. They don't take reservations, and they don't allow anyone other than touring cyclists to stay there. And they haven't had the hostel fill up, but if they did, they do allow people to camp in the city park. So the nice thing is that it's within walking distance of downtown. And they have seen spending by bike tourists increase at local businesses since they opened the hostel. It's been 11 years since they started it, and this kind of collaborative, community-driven, but mostly hands-off model is still working for them. So Spoken Hostel is another bike hostel in Mitchell, Oregon, which is a town of about 130 people, also on the Transamerica Bike Trail. It was started by a couple named Pat and Jalay Farrell, who renovated the town church. They converted the upstairs into a hostel, and they moved church services into the downstairs. There's the main room, which you can see in this photo, with several bunk beds. That is a suggested donation of $25. And they also have a couple of private rooms. They also provide bedding and towels, a kitchen, shower, and bathrooms. And they have Wi-Fi and outlets for each bed. And Spoken Hostel was really a project with the aim of community development from the very beginning. Pat told us in an email, hospitality is more than a building with beds and showers. For us, it's about community and relationships. By creating an environment that reflects a little bit of us, our community, and our Eastern Oregon landscape, there's a very authentic and disarming vibe at Spoken. We stayed true to ourselves, and cyclists find that refreshing and comforting. Our focus has always been about building a healthy, thriving community in this remote part of Eastern Oregon. There are several communities that offer community hospitality in the form of free or by donation camping as well. So just in Montana, we have several small town examples, including Twin Bridges, Anaconda, Ovando, Glendive, and several others that have turned their rest stops, parks, and open spaces into camping areas. They've built indoor picnic areas or sleeping accommodations using historic buildings, an old farming grain bin, a sheep herder wagon, community centers, unused barns, and other creative ideas. These efforts have been led by community members, cities, businesses, churches, trail societies, the American Legion, economic development agencies, and other entities that are interested in community development through hospitality. They were funded in a variety of ways, including private funds and tourism grants. And they're typically able to cover their costs by collecting donations or charging a small fee. Warm showers is another example of community hospitality offered by individuals, which many of you may be familiar with. It's a website that connects touring cyclists with local hosts who offer free accommodations, whether it's a guest bedroom, a couch, a floor, or backyard camping. The idea has caught on, and Warm Showers now has over 150,000 members and over 92,000 hosts in 161 countries around the world. So looking at camping, the trend with both private and publicly run campgrounds has been to expand luxury camping offerings like RVing and glamping, and to reduce the more affordable tent camping options. Private campgrounds are especially catering to more to RVers, and touring cyclists and hikers are often forced to pay extra for amenities and space that they don't really need. Even at state parks, the average cost to tent camp in Florida is about $27 per night, and in Georgia, it's about $30 to $35 per night, and it only goes up from there. In campgrounds where reservations are required, where sites fill up by midday and there isn't any public land available for wild camping nearby, bikers and hikers can be left stranded. So there are two solutions to these issues that we know of. The easier and low cost option is for campgrounds to adopt a no turn away policy or directive, which guarantees a camping space when the campground is full for non-motorized visitors who are traveling without vehicle support. So the space could be an overflow site or any flat open area that could fit a tent and a bike. These photos are from when Jim Stayer, Adventure Cycling's former executive director, arrived at a full campground in Chipokes, I think that's how you say it, Plantation State Park in Virginia last year, which is along the East Coast Greenway. And since Virginia State Parks has a no turn away policy, the staff were able to find a spot for him to put up his tent near the parking lot, and they let him pay the amount that he felt was reasonable. The challenge with no turn away policies, which Jim ran into, is that they are often not very well promoted, and park staff as well as bike travelers can be unaware that they exist. Adventure Cycling tracks these policies, and we have them available for bike travelers to download from our website in case they run into this issue. And actually only a couple of months ago, we found out that Florida State Parks now has a no turn away policy. So we'd encourage you to please spread the word about the policies to your trail users so that they know that they can use them. So the other solution is to implement a hiker-biker campsite, which is the best option for ensuring affordable and always available camping accommodations for trail users. And typically you only need one hiker-biker site per campground, since it's a shared space that is set aside only for hikers and bikers with no vehicle support. So there's no parking space needed, and they often have bike racks, bike repair stations, storage lockers, electrical outlets, and a shared covered picnic area that are provided. It's non-reservable, and it can function as a no turn away space as well. So hikers and bicyclists don't have to worry about being stranded. And hiker-biker sites do require a little investment, but the good news is that they typically cost less than other types of campgrounds to build. The fee to stay there is usually a per person fee under $10. And having this kind of separate fee is also a really great way to count the user group and track usage. So I just saw the East Coast Greenway Alliance's awesome new resource listing all of the state parks following the trail, which is super helpful to identify which parks could be prioritized for adopting no turn away policies and implementing hiker-biker sites. Also, Adventure Cycling created the Guide to Bicycle Camping resource, which provides information for campground managers on why bike camping is important and how to implement these solutions. So we hope you'll share that with campgrounds along your trails and encourage them to implement more flexible and affordable camping accommodations for East Coast Greenway tourists. whether they're doing an overnight trip or doing the whole trail. If your state doesn't have a no turn-away policy and you have contacts at the state parks, we'd be interested in working with you to advocate for these kinds of bike camping improvements. So we're also currently developing a more robust bike tourism program, and we have plans to create a toolkit for communities that are interested in developing the kinds of hospitality options that I mentioned earlier. But for now, there are a few resources on our website, including tips for how to be bike travel friendly, more bike hospitality examples, and other great resources. So if you have any thoughts or questions, please reach out to me by email. I would love to hear from you. Thanks to the East Coast Greenway Alliance and to Devin for figuring out how to do this session online. I'm sure it's been a bit challenging. And thanks everyone for listening, and I hope you all are staying healthy out there.
Thank you all for joining us, and check out greenway.org for more sessions for our virtual summit.